Welcome to all of you. My name is Claire Sufrin. I am the Assistant Director of Jewish Studies in the Crown Family Center for Jewish and Israel Studies. And it is truly a pleasure to welcome you tonight for our annual Manfred H. Vogel Lecture, which will be delivered by Professor Stefano Perfetti of the University of Pisa on the topic of Songs of Praise in a Broken World, as you can see right here. The Crown Family Center for Jewish and Israel Studies provides an umbrella framework for Jewish studies and Israel studies at Northwestern. Our mission is to foster excellence in teaching and research in these fields. Drawing upon faculty as well as courses in several departments, we offer both a major and a minor for undergraduates and coordinate a graduate cluster for PhD students. We support all kinds of research projects related to the history, culture, and/or religion of the Jewish people, projects which are undertaken from everyone ranging from the earliest undergraduates to our most senior faculty members. And we also bring prominent scholars to campus throughout the year to share their research, sometimes with our campus community and several times a year with the larger local community of people interested in Jewish studies and Israel studies, or Leonard Cohen. So, of course, it is that very latter part of our mission that brings us here tonight. And I would be remiss before I continue if I didn't mention that I hope you will all come back on May 7th for our annual Klutznick lecture. There are flyers at the door. If you didn't pick one up on the way in, please pick one up on the way out. That's in Pick Stager, which has 900 seats. So our goal is to open the balcony, which we haven't done in many years. But back to tonight. So the Vogel Lecture was endowed by the family of Professor Manfred Vogel to honor his many years of teaching in the Department of Religious Studies at Northwestern. Over the years, the Vogel Lectureship has allowed us to bring scholars to campus addressing a range of topics. Some of them include Jewish philanthropy, the philosopher Spinoza, Jewish-Christian interactions, and so on and so forth. But tonight we are in for a real treat. In just a moment, my colleague, Professor Ken Seeskin, will introduce our speaker. Ken is the Philip M. and Ethel Klutznick Professor of Jewish Civilization at Northwestern, where he teaches in the philosophy department. He has published several books. I'm going to mention just two. The first is Searching for a Distant God, The Legacy of Maimonides, which was awarded a Koret Jewish Book Award, and his most recent book entitled Thinking About the Torah, A Philosopher Reads the Bible, which I highly recommend. It is a commentary on the Bible that references Kant and Spinoza and all the greats. So there are two additional facts about Ken that I'd like to note as they particularly qualify him tonight to introduce our speaker. The first is that Ken was not only a colleague of Fred Vogel, but his student before that. And for him to speak tonight from the podium is truly to honor Vogel's legacy. The second fact is that Ken is truly a lover of all things Italian, and he has over the years pursued cooperative ventures with colleagues there. And it is due to Ken that we became aware of Professor Perfetti, his work on Leonard Cohen, and were able to invite him here tonight. And so I will hand it over now to my colleague, Ken Seeskin.
Thank you, Claire. Alavai, we should only get this many people for Maimonides. It really is, for me, a special night to pay tribute to two people who've been very important in my life. Manfred Vogel was my first teacher of Jewish philosophy when I was an undergraduate. He taught me how to study religion at the college level. When I took his course, I thought I would coast through on my bar mitzvah knowledge, and soon found out that I was running a C in the course. I made an A at the end, so that's all right. But in those days, this is about the middle 1860s, Manfred was the Jewish Studies program at Northwestern. That was really all we had. And I don't know that he ever envisioned anything like what we have today, but I'm quite sure that if he were able to see this and know everything that we're able to accomplish, he would have been very proud. And the second person, of course, is tonight's speaker, Professor Stefano, a.k.a. Steve Perfetti. Graduated cum laude in philosophy at the University of Pisa, received a PhD from the University of Turin. He's an associate professor at the Department of Civilization and Forms of Knowledge at the University of Pisa, where he teaches the history of medieval philosophy and philosophy of religion. He's also taught philosophy of religion and medieval philosophy at Lucca and Lugano. These are all cities that I very much urge you to visit, by the way. He has published books and articles in Italian and in English on Augustine, Abelard, Albert the Great, Thomas Aquinas, more recently Martin Buber, and of course Leonard Cohen. He's known especially for his work on the understanding of the animal world in Aristotle, medieval and early Renaissance philosophy. He was, of course, a founding member of the Northwestern Pisa Exchange. That's the professional side. Let me just say a word or two about the personal side. Claire was absolutely right. I am in love with all things Italian from the moment I set foot in Italy. And in my first trip to Pisa, I met someone who was as enamored of American culture as I was of Italian, and that was Stefano. And all I could think of when I first met him was the end of the movie Casablanca. Do you know where Humphrey Bogart looks at Claude Rains and says, "Louis, this could be the start of a wonderful friendship." And really a wonderful friendship it has been over these years. In fact, I think it's fair to say that Stefano and I have really become practically brothers. The Atlantic Ocean has not really separated us at all. So we are in for a treat tonight to hear Stefano talk on Leonard Cohen. Please join me in welcoming him to Northwestern.
Well, after such a presentation, it's hard to take the podium. Anyway, I feel really deeply honored to be here to deliver this year's Manfred H. Vogel Lecture in Judaic Studies. I'm very happy to share my ideas with you, and I'm really overwhelmed by the quantity of the audience. I know that is not because of my name that is not widespread, but because of the name of Leonard Cohen. And maybe you are curious to see what a person, an Italian from the other part of the pond, has to say about Leonard Cohen and the metamorphosis of Jewish themes in his poetry and in his lyrics, because there are so many references to the Bible, to liturgy, to piyutim in his lyrics, all intermingled with pieces of autobiography and sort of midrashic transformation. So it's worth revisiting this stuff. And I know that many of you may have much more experience on some of these topics. So if there will be enough time for discussion, I will be glad. And also, if you have something to say during the presentation, let's be informal. Just raise your hand. And I totally disagree. I think we can do that way if you like it. I wish to thank the Vogel family for organizing this, the Crown Family Center, and all those that concretely organized this event: Claire Safrin, Nancy Gelman, Crystal Foster, and not forgetting my friend and brother Ken Siskin for proposing me as a speaker for this year's lecture. Let us see if his trust in me is well placed. Song of Praise in a Broken World. Leonard Cohen from Story of Isaac, 1969 to You Want It Darker, 2016. The near sacrifice of Isaac, near performed by his father Abraham, has been the subject of reinterpretation in every age. To recall just a few of the brightest examples, we can think of the Book of Jubilees, the New Testament, the Church Father Origen, and the early rabbinic midrashim, such as Bereshit Rabbah, up to Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, and contemporary literature, not forgetting Maimonides, the Guide of the Perplexed, and even the Quran. To this, one might add the visual exegesis of painters such as, well, and sculptures as well. This is Donatello, and then we have Caravaggio, Rembrandt, Marc Chagall, an Israeli stamp. And you want to see it again? It's not bad. It's not bad. 1978. And Robert Crumb, the underground cartoonist Robert Crumb, who transfigured in visual language the book of Genesis. Each one of these is a subtly different interpretation in which degrees and modes of being tested, cooperating, or giving proof of extreme faith are variously arranged. In this lecture, I will be focusing on contemporary retelling of the Akedah narrative. More precisely, where our framework will go from the story of Isaac, 1969, to You Want It Darker, 2016. Akedah, as you know, in Hebrew, means the binding of Isaac. This term is used by rabbis to emphasize either the determination of the father in preparing the sacrificial victim or the cooperation of an adult Isaac, as if he had voluntarily submitted to binding to ensure that he did not flinch out of fear, thus invalidating the sacrifice. This second way of reading the binding almost neutralizes several disturbing features of the original narrative. Abraham is no longer a lonely figure in his silent obedience on the verge of performing an incomprehensible action driven by an inner voice, perhaps divine, we believe, a voice heard by him only. In fact, his unaware son asks, "Where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" The idea of a voluntary collaboration of Isaac instead opens the scenario of an almost sacramental collaboration between the two. As you know, the retelling of biblical stories is a constant in Jewish culture. One already finds it in the Bible. From the very first pages, the first two chapters, the second, or better, the first is a retelling of the second, which is more ancient. This art of adding details in order to reveal hidden layers of meaning and to actualize them is part and parcel of the rich corpus of the Midrashim, of the Aggadic Midrashim, as well as countless literary works that draw upon the Bible, the great, as another Canadian used to say, following William Blake, the Canadian is Northrop Frye, the great code of Western literatures. Indeed, several of Cohen's lyrics for songs and literary texts of his contain reference to Jewish tradition, biblical, Talmudic, or liturgical. In interweaving Jewishness, poetry, autobiographical traits, and a paradoxical, unshakable recognition of God's kingship, even, or I would say especially in our defeats, Cohen practices a highly personal midrash. Possibly the most striking example is in the lyrics of a well-known song, Alleluia. Okay, let's start from Alleluia. Everybody knows it. You have Bathsheba, that's no longer the mere subject of David's lust, as in the second book of Samuel, but she takes upon herself the traits of Delilah, initiating an erotic domination of the male partner that eventually leads to a total surrender and a paradoxical recognition of the holiness of the name. So it kind of superimposes the traits of Delilah to those of Bathsheba. In story of Isaac, without article. Story of Isaac, as we shall see, the biblical narrative of the near sacrifice of the son is transformed into the touchstone for all intergenerational conflicts. But the evocation of the risk of death in a father-son relationship also acts as a sort of psychological reversal for the loss of the father that Cohen experienced when he was 9 years old. In this breaking of boundaries between biblical evocation and autobiography, the lyrical language of songs, poems, and other literary texts is the space of a research in which textual materials from the tradition are constantly rewritten. This is the Midrashic spirit I was referring to. Before exploring the theme in the okay, sorry. Okay, before being a famous singer-songwriter, you know, Leonard Cohen was an accomplished writer. Actually, his first LP is from 1967, and he was already 33 years old, not a teenager. He was a writer. He had been awarded several national prizes in Canada. He had written several books of poetry and novels where he interprets his Jewish upbringing in the English-speaking district of Montreal. And in one of his poetry collection, which is the Spice Box, Abdallah, Spice Box of Earth, 1961, we found several poems. I want to show you one of them. This is Prayer of My Wild Grandfather. His grandfather was an European rabbi called Salomon Klonitsky Klein. He was a Talmudic scholar. He has written dictionaries based on the Talmud. And here Cohen's imagined the Talmudic dictionaries compiled by his rabbi grandfather as if they were children offered to God. He gave you his children opened on a table. But this time the Lord let the sacrifice be accomplished. And if a ram, look at the red words, and if a ram ambled in the garden, you whispered nothing about that, nor held a skill in hand. The Holocaust was neither an animal nor a son, though, but the rabbi himself, old and in the throes of dementia. His mind was tested by God, had been tested by God, and ultimately made mad and honeycombed as a buzzing of thoughts and words and parts of his Jewish culture. As you know, the songwriting of the 60s knew a first preparation of the test of Abraham when Bob Dylan, born Robert Zimmerman, in 1965 recorded the song Highway 61 revised. You know that song. Of course you remember. You remember that. The song opens the first verse by retelling the moment in which God tests Abraham in a question and answer exchange whose register is a sort of expressionist street slang. The Abraham of Genesis 22 seems to remember for a while the ability displayed in Genesis 18 when he defended the inhabitants of Sodom, the rightful. The divine order is brutal and direct. Kill me a son. No reference to sacrificial holocaust, no mention of Isaac being Abraham's beloved son. Abraham is puzzled and for a while tries to resist. Man, you must be putting me on. And now God begins to threaten him. The next time you see me coming, you better run. And Abraham surrenders and speaks almost like a gangster. Where do you want this killing be done? Answer, out on Highway 61. Highway 61, the symbolic road that connects Minnesota, where Dylan was born, to the south, the source of his music. Please note that for Dylan too, the Midrashic projection was almost spontaneous because his father was named Abraham Zimmerman. Leonard Cohen's retelling of the Akedah is in a wholly different league let me say it. This song, Story of Isaac, was written in 1969, first issued on the LP Songs from a Room, the second LP, and later issued in an intense live version on the album Live Songs 1973. We will be hearing a snippet from this second version, recorded in Berlin in 1972. Cohen explores the incomprehensible expendability of the song, feeling what had been left unsaid in the Bible. The lyrics begin by reshaping the biblical narrative, but soon the theme widens to include the dialectics that link oppressors and victims in every generation, in every age. In other words, the figure of Abraham, caught in the final moment of the near sacrifice of his son Isaac, becomes the archetypal configuration for every parent-children relationship, and hence the figure of the conflict or cooperation between generations. The need of feeling what had been left unspoken in the Akedah narrative in the Bible has always been felt. And the reason is clear. The narrative of Genesis 22 is focused on Abraham, we say it. Faced with the incomprehensible demand to sacrifice the very son that is for him a sign of divine benevolence, he obeys head down. He makes no comment. For a long time, he remains silent. His first words, you remember, are dispositions for the servant. He says, "Stay here with the donkey." The donkey. No words between him and the son. At the end, it is Isaac who speaks, asking, "Father, I see the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb?" And Abraham replies with chilling abstraction, "God himself will procure the lamb." Isaac seems unaware, as if ensnared in a story that is beyond his comprehension. There is no real dialogue between father and son. The initial silence and now the vagueness of Abraham's response are both disconcerting and, well, morally unacceptable, almost at a first glance, for the general reader. Such aspects are so disturbing and unbearable that the ancient and rabbinical exegesis tried to mitigate their implications. For this reason, the sources, the Targum Neophide, the Targum Yonatan, but also the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah, modify the moral landscape and imagine an adult Isaac who willingly accepts the sacrifice, accepts to be well tied in order to avoid pulling back at the sight of the knife. From a different angle, others try to transform the nature of the responsibilities of Abraham. In the Book of Jubilees, which was canonical at Qumran, as you know, the order is not from God, but from Mastema, or Satan. In the Talmud, the sacrifice of Isaac is reshaped according to a sort of Joban narrative, so that God intends to show Satan the fidelity of his servant Abraham, also in the extreme test. This is in Sanhedrin, for instance. An alternative line of rationalization was to drop the blame on Abraham, as if he was punished for neglecting the duties of charity. And this is, you can find in Bereshit Rabbah and also in the Sefer Zohar. In the lyrics of Story of Isaac, Cohen starts from the gaps, from the holes, from what is left unsaid in the biblical text, from its linguistic and moral silences. It does not try to mitigate its implication, but retells the story from the perspective of Isaac, of a sort of Isaac Leonard, let's call it, and adds new particular. The mysterious entrance of the father in the child's room to announce the mission, his height his strength, his holiness, and the blue eyes of the Cohen's father had blue eyes of the man. Is in the second verse that you'll see later, the striding, climbing to which his child holds back running, the axe that's made with gold, because it's a ritual weapon intended not to be offensive. To make the midrashic appropriation even more intense, the first lines blend the point of view of Isaac with Cohen's own biography, for he had lost his father Nathan at the age of 9 in 1943, as if the biblical command to sacrifice the beloved son Isaac could be interpreted as a narrative in reverse of his juvenile grief. In this second stanza, the two continue their silent dialogue made of gestures alone, but there is no tension. They drink together. Abraham puts his hand on Isaac's, and he is sure that his son will not try to escape and avoid the sacrifice. There is a spirit of sharing, of partnership. By saying at the center, I thought I saw an eagle, but it might have been a vulture, I never could decide. Cohen alludes to the indecisions of biblical translator with the Hebrew word nesher. Nesher, understood by most as eagle, most probably it denotes the griffon vulture. It's a sophistication on behalf of Cohen to emphasize this ambiguity of the biblical language, as well as to mention the alternative between by a demon or a god, which is well attested in midrashic literature, as we saw before, mastema. It creates in the listener a feeling for the stratification of meanings, indicating that things are not as they may seem, that the semantics through images in a vision sent by God is not clear and distinct as the logic of an objective event. The weapon of Abraham is precious and symbolic, is not made to kill, is not blunt and bloody. Cohen's Isaac has gone through an extreme experience, and maybe his descendants will carry a permanent trace of it. But in contrast to what proposes one of the other heroes in Professor Siskin's book, Kierkegaard, well, not a hero, but a voice in his book. In the fourth of the, you know this book by Kierkegaard, Fear and Trembling. He says, oh, I'd like to have been there to see what really happened on the Moriah. And then it sketches 4 possibilities. In the fourth of these interpretations, Isaac has lost faith, silently has lost faith. In Cohen's reading, Isaac has not lost faith. He reminds us that we were not there to see, and we cannot even imagine that his father's hand was trembling with the beauty of the word. And this does not apply, that's the point, to those who send today, at the time of Cohen, their children to sacrifice in contemporary wars. They do it for just for a political scheme, that is a word, scheme, not a vision. It was not a scheme, it was a scheme, not a vision. In this third stanza, lyrics shift to an indictment against the fact that older generation can decide to send their children to die in the war for purely selfish reasons. You who build these altars now to sacrifice these children, you must not do it anymore. A scheme is not a vision, and you never have been tempted by a demon or a god. These words clearly underscore the nature of mere political plan, a scheme of contemporary wars, as opposed to the divine inspiration, the vision sent by God that animated the ancient patriarch. Further, it is to be noticed that their hatchets are blunt and bloody, as opposed to Abraham's golden axe. But ultimately, this song does not propose a generic pacifist solution which neutralizes conflicts. In fact, the last verse opens with hard and bitter lines whose meaning might hide at a first reading. And if you call me brother now, forgive me if I inquire, just according to whose plan? When it all comes down to dust, I will kill you if I must. I will help you if I can. It's not a pacifist song. It's something a bit different. The easy pacifist solution with its indiscriminate appeal to brotherhood is viewed with suspicion and rejected. This song, first recorded by Cohen in 1969, could refer to the pacifist campaigns against the Vietnam War, but also to those relating to the Arab-Israeli conflict, such as the Six-Day War of 1967. We must remember the spirit of that period. The narrative of Abraham and the near sacrifice of Isaac, in its mysterious, naked symbolism, was also appropriated by several Israeli writers in the first years of the state and later in the 1960s. Many from the founders' generation considered the Akedah as a symbol of their own sacrifices for establishing the State of Israel. Such is the position of authors like Moshe Shamir, Avraham Shlonsky, and Chaim Guri. And even in the period of the 1967 Six-Day War, when the founders happened to be too old to fight and their children were sent to fight in their place, the biblical narrative, interpreted in terms of willing participation of Isaac in the Akedah, was invoked by many of a sort of authoritative legitimation for intergenerational cooperation. But they were also authors who put under scrutiny this rhetoric and rejected it, given that such a way of reading the Akedah obliterates that eventually the angel stayed Abraham's hand and it was the ram and not Isaac to be sacrificed. Echoes of such debates might well have reached Cohen's perceptive ears. In Cohen's lyrics, the clash seems incurable and likely to be repeated up to a scene of devastation, almost eschatological, when it all comes down to dust. But what level of conflict are we talking about? Political, ethnic, or just intergenerational? In an interview published in October 1974, please mind the date, 74, exactly 1 year after the Yom Kippur War, and Cohen, as you know, as probably some of you know, was there, he participated playing for the Israeli troops. Cohen had to declare, this song doesn't end with a plea for peace. It doesn't end with a plea for sanity between the generation. It ends saying, I'll kill you if you can. I will help you if I must. I will kill you if I must. I will help you if you can. We changes the lyrics in this interview. Anyway, and the last line of this quotation. That's all I can say about it. My father died when I was 9. That is the reason I put that one of us had to go. The connection between the steps of this statement are rather convoluted, but it seems to reveal a profound psychobiographical nexus that probably acted as a thematic thread. The early loss of the father is a paradoxical figure in reverse of the sacrifice of Isaac. One of us had to go. As if to close the circle, 47 years later, in 2016, the title track from the last album issued by Cohen in his lifetime, You Want It Darker, same title as the CD, as the LP. A disenchanted meditation of the obscurities, on the obscurities of history, on a world that is becoming ever darker. This song, You Want It Darker, bursts with these words in the refrain, Hineni, Hineni, I'm ready, my lord. And of course, everybody knows this expression. Is a word uttered by Abraham to respond to God when asked to sacrifice Isaac. You Want It Darker was published on October 21st, 2016, two months before Cohen's death. The lyrics, which culminate in the chorus, Hineni, I'm ready, my lord, at first seem to address preparation for death. He was ill. He had cancer. He knew he had to die. Hineni, as you know, is not only the answer of Abraham to God when he was summoned to sacrifice his son Isaac, but is also one of the Rosh Hashanah liturgy readings, and also the title of a prayer of preparation and humility addressed to God that the Chazan, the cantor of the Ashkenazite synagogues, intone in the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, just before the Musaf, the additional prayer for the more solemn occasions. In the liturgy, Hineni is followed immediately by the Kaddish, with a particular melody that is sung only in the day of O. In fact, in another section of Cohen's lyrics of this song, you find magnified and sanctified be thy holy name. It's very close to Itgedal Itgedash Shmei Rabbah. But the following verse, please notice, vilified and crucified in the human frame. This makes sense. This gives a different depth to the song, to this line. There is a sort of abysmal identification between crucifixion, not in a Christian sense. Crucifixion is a symbol of human frailty, vilified and crucified in the human frame. On closer inspection, thus, the lyrics of You Want It Darker reverse the perspective of the traditional prayers and offer a meditation, let me say, on the dark side of the covenant. In Cohen's wording, it is not the man to be called to take stock of his sins and account for his actions. Cohen speaks directly to God and does not even ask for an explanation. Is not asking for an explanation of the meaning of suffering as Job had done in the central part of the eponymous book. No, Cohen speaks directly to God just to describe before him the bleak picture of the human condition of generations and generation who lit their candles in vain. The Holy Scripture as a covenant, promises of love, erotic and witty metaphors, but all this find a constant glacial neutralization in the hardships of history. The fourth verse displays, the second on the screen, a parade of military violence of all times, but in particular evocative of those years in which the banality of evil, to use the words of Hannah Arendt, turned peaceful bourgeois, middle class and tame, into officials of death, who, in the style of the Eichmann trial in 1961, say they are almost surprised to have received permission to murder and maim. Theologists, a lullaby for suffering. I want to comment on that. Theologists develop their consoling pieces of literature, their lullaby for suffering, They speak of a paradox, of the incommensurability between divine plan and human understanding, on the redemptive role of suffering, of eschatological restoration of justice. But the truth is written in the scriptures, and is not some idle claim. God wants it darker. God wants a darker world. You Want It Darker is the opening track of the last album, I said. The last issued by Cohen. The whole album, you've listened to the music. This is a bass line to die for. And the drums are just an upbeat of the hi-hat. It's perfect, it's classic. It will be classic in 100 years, you know. The whole album is a masterpiece of essentiality and intensity. Cohen by now was seriously ill, and he was about to give up and leave this artistic testament unfinished. This achievement, and this is very important, was made possible only thanks to the obstinacy of his son Adam, who took the technical reins of the project, directing the musician in the studio and helping his father to sing while remaining at home on an orthopedic chair. Such a son-father cooperation is particularly moving and adds an intimate and reconciling overtone to this last revisitation by Cohen of the Akeda themes. Musically, the song has this restless pace driven by this syncopated ostinato figuration of the bass, and is colored, have you heard the Hammond organ? And is colored with this churchy, pardon my French, chordal work of the Hammond organ played by Pat Leonard, a famous producer with Madonna. You remember Pat Leonard? And Neil Larson, and filtered to the Leslie speaker. Do you know what a Leslie says? Yes, of course you know. Of course you know. And it is to be noticed that in the American musical code, these gospel traits do not entail confessional bonds. They mean spirituality, prayer, talking to God. On the oral foreground, with clarity and projection in the mix, we perceive the deep guttural voice of Leonard Cohen chiseling this final message of his. And the choir and the Hazan, they are from the synagogue Shar HaShomaim of Montreal. They sing softly, almost humming during the song, and in the finale, they are joined by the soaring melismata of the Chazan Gideon Zermaya. Shar HaShomaim, the Gate of Heaven, is a synagogue founded by Cohen's grandfather, where the young Leonard had received his Jewish upbringing. The earthly journey is about to end. It's time to go back home. Cohen died 2 months after the release of You Want It Darker. This has prompted many, in retrospect, to perceive the title track as a dying man's prayer of extreme confession and surrender, almost as if it meant, Hineni, here I am, Lord, I am ready to die. But it's not so. Indeed, he repeats here the biblical here I am of Abraham, and this Hineni expresses acceptance, true, but Cohen's acceptance is uneasy and disenchanted. The opening stanza, with its paradoxical and alienating tones, still give voice to a prayer and a confession rooted in a Joban feeling of creatorial fragility and dependence. The following lines, though, tackle the hardships of history of all time and draw a colorless scenario. It's all shades of gray. In invoking once again the symbolic figure of the acceptance of Abraham, the lyrics take us back to the Akedah, a sacrifice which is also a sacrifice of meaning. A painful recognition that the events in the history, but also the story of our own expectations, might not have the sense we hoped it might have. Hineni is used here to say, I cannot but accept the mysterious dynamics of history. I just want to declare in front of you that I do recognize the manifold non sequitur of our many designs of hope. And this, after all, was also the message of Story of Isaac. Once again, Cohen ruminates his dark meditations and give voice to what I would like to call a night Judaism, devoid of messianic redemption. Nevertheless, as Cohen himself happened to say to a 5th grade student apropos of the meaning of Alleluia, 2 lines. I wanted to stand with those who clearly see God's holy, broken world for what it is and still find the courage or heart to praise it. Thank you. Toda.
Very good. We have time for a few questions. Let me just implore you to keep them short and simple. We have a mic.
And understandable by me,
And understand.
that I'm not a native speaker and have a precarious knowledge
Okay,
of
we have a
English.
question. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure I will be hearing.
First of all, thank you. This was incredible. Cohn's sentiment, his neshama, you could see is very much related to a time. And he brings with him the sense of the bleakness of the Holocaust. And I was wondering, what would Cohn be singing about if he was 25 years old today? Who are his spiritual successors? You know, is it Idan Rachel? Is it Ezra Furman from Evanston, Illinois, who sings in this dark sort of...
Thank you for this question. Well, today there's no possibility to have another Cohen because he was a second generation. His grandparents were all raised in the yeshivas in Lithuania. And although he was a man of many talents and many distractions in his life, he had a solid Talmudic formation. He remembers the time spent on the lap of his grandfather, and he would read Isaiah, and then he started to sleep and read again in the Soncino edition. And well, this is almost unthinkable today. So there is no way to have a Cohen today.
Thank you very much. All of these songs are so melodious and so catchy, yet there are some, like the last one, where there's no melody, it just speaks the word. Is there anywhere in his accounts any explanation when he chose to do one versus the other?
Well, his voice was changing. The register became lower and lower. It was almost I don't know if I know a proper English word, grumbling, grantle, something of that sort. So it became sort of a resonance for the poetic word. And if you go home tonight, you'll try to find your LPs. I'm sure you will do that. But I knew. But if you listen Cohen from the late 60s or 70s, his voice is different, and the arrangement. For instance, have you wondered why I let you listen not the first version of Story of Isaac 69, but the one from 1972? What is the worst thing that has the word Jew in its name? The Jew's harp. And the first version is pastored by a Jew's harp playing like this old. The arrangements were a bit strange. The last part of Cohen's career was different because he had an extraordinary group. Neil Larson on the Hammond, and Javier Mas, Spanish, on archilut, and banduria, and all kinds of ethnic guitars. And was Roscoe Beck on bass, upright bass and electric bass, and as a director of the arrangements. It was a fantastic band. If you buy CDs like Live in Dublin that are from 2000, are recent, 2009, the band is almost perfect, and his voice is different. Is more true to its poetic nature. He doesn't try. He has never been a singer proper. He was always exploring the world. So most of his older, to answer your question, most of his older songs are revisited in that vein. Okay. So my suggestion is to resist and to go to Barnes and Noble and to buy the recent CDs.
Two more questions.
Yeah, I was a little perplexed about the general negativity of the presentation of his life. Because you didn't mention anything about, what has motivated Jews through great turmoil in history. Tikva, the sense of hope, and I think this was a presentation about hopelessness and helplessness. Yeah. Now, was this his total grasp of being a Jew? Was there I don't know enough about his biography to comment intelligently, but was there anything in terms of what you shared with us?
I see the point, and I agree with you. I called his a sort of night Judaism, as opposed also to differentiate it from Judaism proper. Night Judaism is he really liked his grandfather, his rabbi grandfather, but not when he was that Talmudic scholar that he was, but when he went mad. He liked the idea of this, it was honeycombed, so like the buzzing of bees in his brain. And his idea of Judaism was not as systematic, was a sort of suggestion that he always mingled with his autobiography. He was dependent on drugs for a long time. He had several complicated affairs with women, a difficult relationship with his son. So his theology is not systematic, it's an exploration. That is why I call it night Judaism. The night of a man that feels alone too.
Yes, thank you. I understand he has a very, very deeply Jewish sensibility, but he also used a lot of Christian imagery in his songs, like Suzanne, and then he spent years as a Buddhist monk later in his life. Could you say something about his exploration in other religious traditions?
That's a very good point. He has an Irish maid at home, and she used to bring him to the Mass. So he had a certain acquaintance with Catholicism. And in Suzanne, in Suzanne it's different, because he said, let me check if I have in a rocket time the text of the. Well, I have it. You refer to that famous. Let's see. Okay. And Jesus was a sailor when he walked upon the water, and he spent a long time watching from his lonely wooden tower. Actually, it is a statue in Montreal. And when he knew for certain only drowning men could see him, he said, all men will be sailors until the sea shall free them. But he himself was broken long before the sky would open. So it's not open to Christianity. He mentions Christ as a figure of a broken person, and the cross is evoked several times in Cohen's lyrics, but as a symbol, as a sign of human frailty. There is no sign of redemption. He didn't accept even messianism in Judaism. Figure if he wants to accept something of the Christian idea or the Messiah. Well, I have several verses, but in his last LP, You Want It Darker, there's a song called Treaty, and he says, and it's a dialogue with Christ, and he say, at the end, only one of us was true, and it was me. So this is and as regards, and this relates to the previous question. So it was very centered on an autobiographical exploration. As for Buddhism, it was often questioned about that and interviewed about that. And he used to say that Buddhism has no deity. So for him, there was no contradiction. And also, if you are the dealer, then I'm out of the game. If you are the healer, then I'm broken and lame. He was lame because he broke a leg during the Zen position. And then, because of that limitation, he started again with Shimon Ezra and the daily prayers. So his rediscovery of the practice of Judaic prayer started when he was in that monastery here in the States. Kind of strange. I know.
One more. Yes, sir.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I'll just, you know this, I guess, but I think in the last interview that the New Yorker did, he flat out denied that he was a Buddhist. He said, I don't need another religion. I have a perfectly good one in Judaism. So exactly. But my question, and I risk overreading, and I may have overheard, but what's going through my head now, you just mentioned his son Adam got him through sort of this passage of the last recording, and I wonder if this may be a ridiculous stretch, but Adam, of course, famously does not say hineni, but probably should have. But the question, Ayeka, where are you, is first posed to Adam, and maybe there's something going on there where his Adam can say hineni because he's there.
This is not a question. Thank you for saying that. It's a wonderful addition.
Okay, thank you for coming next year in Pisa.
Next year in Italy.